Imagine walking along a quiet river in Northern California on an ordinary January morning. The water is icy, birds are singing, the forests stand untouched beneath the rising sun. Nothing about this place suggests that history is about to change. Then a man bends down, reaches into the shallow water, and picks up what looks like a strange yellow stone. At first, he isn't even sure what he's holding, but within minutes, one realization begins to spread like wildfire. It isn't a rock, it's gold. That single discovery would ignite the greatest migration in American history. Farmers would abandon their crops, sailors would desert their ships, merchants would lock their stores without a second thought. Entire towns would empty almost overnight as hundreds of thousands of people risked everything for a chance to become rich. Some would build fortunes beyond imagination. Most would lose everything. Thousands would never return home. But the greatest fortune of the California gold rush wasn't found in the rivers. It was made by a man who understood one simple truth before anyone else. When millions of people chase gold, the smartest person doesn't dig for it. He sells the shovel. This is the incredible story of how one tiny gold nugget transformed America forever. Long before California became the land of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and million-dollar cities, it was a distant frontier at the edge of the known United States. Vast forests, towering mountains, and powerful rivers stretched across a landscape that few Americans had ever seen. The region had only recently come under American control after the Mexican-American War, and much of it remained isolated from the rest of the country. Life moved slowly here. Small settlements were scattered across enormous distances. Supply wagons arrived only occasionally, and most people expected California to remain a quiet agricultural territory for decades. One of those settlers was a Swiss immigrant named John Sutter. Sutter dreamed of building his own empire in California. Along the American River, he established a settlement known as Sutter's Fort, where farms, workshops, and a sawmill were beginning to take shape. It seemed like the perfect foundation for a prosperous future. In January 1848, Sutter ordered the construction of a new sawmill along the American River. One morning, while inspecting the water channel, his carpenter, James Marshall, noticed something glittering beneath the flowing water. He reached down, picked it up, turned it over in his hand. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Marshall performed simple tests, hammering it flat and examining its unusual shine. Every test pointed to the same astonishing conclusion: it was pure gold. For a few moments, excitement filled the camp. Then came fear. Sutter immediately understood the disaster this discovery could bring. If news escaped, workers would abandon their jobs. Farmers would leave their fields. His dream of building an agricultural empire would collapse before it was ever completed, so everyone swore secrecy. For weeks, the discovery remained hidden. At least, that was the plan, because secrets involving unimaginable wealth almost never stay buried. Just a few miles away lived a man whose instincts for opportunity were unlike anyone else's. His name was Samuel Brannan. Brannan wasn't a miner. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even particularly interested in finding gold himself. He was a businessman. Years earlier, Brannan had arrived in California with a group of Mormon settlers, hoping to establish a new religious community far from persecution in the eastern United States. But events moved faster than anyone expected. By the time they reached California, American forces had already taken control of the territory, destroying the future Brannan had imagined. Many people would have considered it a devastating failure. Brannan saw something else: opportunity. Instead of farming, he opened a general store near Sutter's Fort, selling tools, food, clothing, and supplies to travelers and settlers. Business was steady, but nothing extraordinary. Then one ordinary customer walked through his door carrying something extraordinary. The man paid for a bottle using tiny flakes of bright yellow dust. Gold. The moment Brannan saw it, his mind began racing. If one laborer had found gold, how much more was still lying hidden beneath California's rivers? Unlike everyone else, Brannan wasn't thinking about becoming a miner. He was thinking about becoming the man who supplied every miner. Within days, he quietly purchased every pickaxe, shovel, pan, boot, blanket, rope, and tool he could find. Warehouses were emptied, store shelves were stripped bare. While others were still debating whether the rumors were true, Brannon was preparing for the biggest business opportunity of his life. Then came the moment that changed everything. On May 10th, 1848, Samuel Brannon ran through the muddy streets of San Francisco, holding a bottle filled with sparkling gold dust above his head. "Gold, gold, gold from the American River!" The words echoed through the town like an explosion. People stopped working instantly. Blacksmiths left their forges burning. Ship captains watched entire crews abandon their vessels. Carpenters dropped their hammers in the middle of construction. Shopkeepers locked their doors. Newspapers stopped printing. Within hours, San Francisco was no longer an ordinary frontier settlement. It had become the starting point of a human stampede, unlike anything America had ever witnessed. And Samuel Brannon smiled, because while everyone else was preparing to search for gold, he had already figured out who was really going to become rich. The streets of San Francisco emptied with astonishing speed. Men who had spent years building businesses suddenly walked away from everything they owned. Sailors abandoned ships that had traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific. Shopkeepers locked their doors without knowing if they would ever return. Even government officials quietly disappeared, convinced that unimaginable wealth was waiting somewhere beyond the Sierra Nevada. Within weeks, the city itself seemed to be dissolving. But Samuel Brannon wasn't among the crowds racing toward the rivers. He stood behind his counters, smiling. Every miner needed a shovel. Every miner needed a pickaxe. Every miner needed boots, blankets, rope, lanterns, food, and whiskey. And Brannon had already bought nearly all of it. As thousands rushed toward the goldfields, they unknowingly walked straight into his business. The prices became almost unbelievable. A simple mining pan sold for many times its original value. A shovel that once cost only a few dollars suddenly became a luxury. Food prices exploded almost overnight. Anything connected to mining became worth far more than the gold many prospectors would eventually discover. While exhausted miners spent 12 hours a day, knee-deep in freezing rivers, hoping to find a few glittering flakes, Samuel Brannon earned fortunes every single day simply by selling them the tools they needed. Before long, his stores were generating thousands of dollars daily. He wasn't mining gold, he was mining the dream itself. Then the news reached Washington. For months, rumors had spread across the country, but many Americans dismissed them as exaggerated frontier gossip. That changed when President James K. Polk officially confirmed that California's gold discovery was real. The announcement triggered one of the largest voluntary migrations in human history. People came from everywhere. Farmers left fertile land behind. Lawyers abandoned their offices. Doctors packed their medical bags. Teachers closed their classrooms. Blacksmiths extinguished their furnaces. Entire families sold everything they owned to finance one desperate journey west. Some believed they would return within a few months, carrying enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. Very few understood what actually awaited them. Reaching California was an adventure that could easily become a death sentence. There was no transcontinental railroad, no interstate highways, no Panama Canal. Travelers had only three terrible choices. The first was crossing America by wagon. It meant traveling more than 2,000 miles across endless plains, scorching deserts, towering mountains, and hostile weather. Wagon trains moved painfully slowly. Water disappeared without warning. Food spoiled. Disease spread rapidly through crowded camps. Many families buried loved ones beside the trail before continuing forward, knowing that stopping meant risking everyone else's survival. The second route required sailing around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. The voyage often lasted 6 months or more. Violent storms smashed ships against towering waves. Freezing temperatures, disease, and food shortages became constant companions. Many passengers reached California exhausted before they had even begun searching for gold. The third option appeared shorter. Travelers sailed to Panama, crossed dense tropical jungles on foot, then boarded another ship on the Pacific coast. It sounded easier. It wasn't. Malaria, yellow fever, heat, flooded rivers, poisonous insects. For countless travelers, the jungle proved more dangerous than the ocean itself. Yet despite every obstacle, they kept coming. By the end of 1849, more than 100,000 fortune seekers had flooded into California. They became known as the 49ers. Some arrived speaking English, others spoke Spanish, French, German, Chinese, Italian, or dozens of other languages. California suddenly became one of the most diverse places on Earth. Every ship entering San Francisco carried more dreamers. Every wagon train added another wave of desperate hope. The tiny frontier village transformed almost overnight into a booming city bursting with opportunity and chaos. Buildings appeared faster than anyone could count. Hotels, gambling halls, saloons, restaurants, banks, and general stores lined muddy streets crowded with strangers from every corner of the globe. Money flowed everywhere. So did crime. With enormous fortunes changing hands every day, thieves found easy targets. Arguments over mining claims often ended with fists, sometimes knives, sometimes bullets. The law struggled to keep pace with the explosive population growth. Justice often depended on whoever carried the biggest weapon or had the largest group of friends. Meanwhile, hundreds of mining camps appeared throughout the Sierra Nevada. They had names that sounded almost mythical: Hangtown, Murderer's Bar, Whiskey Flat. These rough settlements grew almost overnight wherever someone believed gold could be found. Life inside them was brutal. Canvas tents offered little protection against freezing nights or relentless rain. Fresh food was almost impossible to find. Medical care barely existed. Miners worked from sunrise until darkness, standing in icy rivers with aching backs and bleeding hands. Hour after hour, they scooped gravel into metal pans, swirling muddy water again and again, praying to see tiny flashes of yellow resting at the bottom. Most days, they found nothing. But every so often, someone uncovered a rich pocket of gold. A shout echoed through the valley. Men dropped their own work and rushed toward the lucky miner. Within minutes, hundreds of new claims surrounded the discovery. Hope spread faster than reason. Every new success convinced thousands more that tomorrow would finally be their turn. It was the perfect illusion. Because for every miner who struck it rich, thousands quietly went home with empty pockets. And while dream after dream crumbled beneath California's rivers, one man continued growing richer than almost everyone searching for gold. Samuel Brannan had discovered the greatest secret of the gold rush. The safest way to profit from a gold rush was never to chase the gold at all. The dream was beginning to die. By the mid-1850s, the rivers that had once sparkled with easy gold had been picked nearly clean. The lucky days of finding fortune with a simple pan were disappearing. Every new discovery demanded more labor, more money, and more powerful equipment than ordinary miners could ever afford. The California gold rush was changing, not because the gold was gone, but because the rules had changed. Individual prospectors who had crossed oceans chasing freedom suddenly found themselves competing against wealthy investors and giant mining companies. Steam-powered machinery replaced hand tools. Massive hydraulic cannons blasted entire hillsides apart, washing millions of tons of earth into rivers below. The landscape itself began to disappear. Mountains were carved away. Ancient forests vanished. Crystal-clear rivers turned brown with mud and toxic chemicals. Mercury, used to separate tiny gold particles from sand, poisoned the waterways. Fish populations collapsed. Farmland flooded beneath thick layers of mining debris. Even today, more than 170 years later, traces of that mercury still remain in California's rivers, reminding us that some consequences of the gold rush never truly ended. But while California's environment paid a terrible price, its economy exploded. What had started as a remote frontier was transforming into one of America's most powerful states. Roads stretched across mountains, ports expanded, Banks multiplied, railroads followed, merchants built fortunes supplying growing towns. Farmers discovered that feeding miners could be more profitable than mining itself. Businesses replaced camps, cities replaced tents. The gold rush had become far bigger than gold. No one represented that transformation better than Samuel Brannan. Years earlier, he had watched thousands of desperate men race toward the rivers. He had made a different choice. Instead of chasing treasure, he sold hope. His stores generated incredible wealth. He invested in land, banks, newspapers, transportation, and real estate. Before long, Samuel Brannan became the richest man in California. His name appeared everywhere. He walked through San Francisco dressed in expensive tailored suits, smoking fine cigars, while people whispered that they were looking at the wealthiest man in the entire state. It seemed impossible that his fortune could ever disappear. But history has a strange habit of humbling those who believe success will last forever. As the years passed, Brannan became increasingly reckless. He made risky investments. He became involved in political conflicts. Heavy drinking slowly consumed his judgment. His marriage collapsed. Business opportunities turned into financial disasters. The same man who had mastered the gold rush slowly lost control of his own life. One fortune disappeared after another. By the time Samuel Brannan died in 1889, almost nothing remained. The man who had once earned more money than thousands of miners combined died nearly penniless. His children received almost nothing. There wasn't even enough money for his burial. The richest man California had ever known was eventually laid to rest in an unmarked grave. It is one of history's greatest ironies. The man who understood wealth better than almost anyone couldn't keep it. But Samuel Brannan's story is only one chapter of a much larger legacy. The California Gold Rush permanently changed the United States. Between 1848 and 1855, hundreds of thousands of people poured into California from nearly every continent on Earth. Entire communities appeared almost overnight. New industries emerged. International trade expanded across the Pacific. California entered the Union as a state in 1850, years earlier than anyone had expected. Without the gold rush, modern California might never have become the economic giant we know today. The foundations of its agriculture, banking system, shipping industry, and transportation networks were all accelerated by those extraordinary years. In many ways, the spirit that later built Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and some of the world's largest companies can be traced back to the same belief that drove thousands westward. The belief that somewhere beyond the horizon, opportunity was waiting. But there was another side to this story, one that many history books ignored for generations. As miners flooded into California, Native American communities suffered unimaginable destruction. Entire villages were forced from their ancestral lands. Violence became widespread. Disease spread rapidly. Starvation followed as traditional hunting grounds disappeared. Thousands lost not only their homes but their lives. For many indigenous Californians, the gold rush was not a story of opportunity. It was a story of survival. Immigrant miners also faced discrimination and violence. Chinese, Mexican, Chilean, and other foreign miners were often forced to pay special taxes, denied legal protection, and driven away from profitable claims. The promise of equality that attracted so many people rarely matched the reality they found. That is the complicated truth about the California Gold Rush. It created enormous wealth. It fueled innovation. It accelerated America's rise as a global economic power. But it also left behind environmental destruction, social inequality, and human suffering on a scale that cannot be ignored. History is rarely a story of heroes and villains. More often, it is a story of choices and their consequences, all of it. The booming cities, the railroads, the fortunes, the tragedies, the dreams fulfilled and the dreams destroyed, can be traced back to one quiet morning in January 1848, when an ordinary carpenter noticed something shimmering beneath the cold waters of the American River. One tiny gold nugget, one unexpected discovery, one moment that transformed California and changed the future of America forever. If you enjoyed uncovering the untold stories behind history's greatest turning points, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to History Decoding, and let me know in the comments. If you had lived in 1849, would you have risked everything to join the California Gold Rush? Or would you have stayed home? Because sometimes, the people who make the greatest fortunes are not the ones chasing history. They're the ones who understand it.